I sold my logistics empire for $58 million this afternoon, and to celebrate I took my son and his wife to the most expensive dinner in New York City. While they went to slow dance to Sinatra, a security guard leaned over my shoulder. He did not ask for a tip. He whispered 6 words that froze my blood. I saw him poison your drink, so I did the only logical thing. I switched the glasses. Before I reveal the chaotic aftermath, let me know in the comments if you have ever trusted someone who stabbed you in the back. Hit subscribe if you believe in karma, because karma is exactly what I served for dessert that night. The Obsidian was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was dim and the steak cost more than my first car. I sat there feeling the weight of 72 years in my bones. I am Garrison Ford, and for 40 years I built Ford Logistics from a single truck into a national fleet. Today I signed it all away. My son Bradley raised his champagne flute, his smile stretching wide across his face. "To you, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with a sweetness that did not quite reach his eyes. "You finally deserve to rest. You have worked hard enough." Beside him, his wife Kendra squeezed my hand. Her manicured nails dug into my skin just a little too hard. "We will take care of everything now, Garrison," she cooed. "You do not have to worry about a single penny." I forced a smile. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that the boy I taught to fish and the woman he married actually loved me and not just my bank account. "Why don't you two dance?" I suggested, pointing toward the floor. They did not hesitate. They glided away like a pair of vultures circling a carcass. I watched them. Bradley looked so polished in his Italian suit, but I knew about the gambling debts he thought he had hidden. I reached for my glass of orange juice. It was freshly squeezed, my favorite drink since I quit alcohol 20 years ago. A shadow fell over my table. It was not a waiter. It was a security guard, a tall man with broad shoulders and eyes that scanned the room like a radar. His name tag read Dante. He stood with his back to the dance floor, pretending to adjust the silverware on my table. "Mr. Ford," he murmured, his voice low and urgent. "Do not drink that." I frowned, looking up at him. "Excuse me." Dante did not make eye contact. He kept pretending to polish a spoon. "Your son. When you checked your watch a minute ago, he poured a white powder from a compartment in his ring into your glass. I saw it on the reflection of the window. Do not touch it." My heart hammered against my ribs. A ring. Bradley had been twisting that silver band on his finger all night. A part of me wanted to yell at this guard to get lost. But the Marine in me, the part that survived the jungles of Da Nang in '68, screamed at me to listen. I looked down at the juice. It looked completely normal. But then I squinted. Floating near the ice cube was a tiny cluster of white grains that had not fully dissolved yet. The air left my lungs. My son was not just lazy. He was an assassin. Rage, cold and sharp, replaced my shock. I did not panic. I did not make a scene. I waited until they turned for a dip in the dance. With a steady hand, I took my napkin and dipped the corner into the juice, soaking up a sample to test later. Then I reached across the table. Kendra had ordered a screwdriver, a cocktail that looked exactly like my orange juice. In one smooth motion, I swapped the glasses. I sat back, crossed my arms, and waited for them to return. I watched the bubbles settle in the orange juice. The white powder the guard had warned me about was invisible, now dissolved into the pulp. My hand moved on instinct, honed from years in the jungle and decades in the boardroom. I took the linen napkin from my lap. It was starched and stiff. I dipped the corner into the liquid just enough to soak up a few drops. Then I folded it tight and shoved it deep into the inner pocket of my jacket. That wet patch pressing against my ribs felt like a bullet wound, but I needed evidence. If I survived this night, I would need scientific proof that my own flesh and blood tried to end me. The song on the dance floor was ending. The final notes of the saxophone hung in the air. I had 10 seconds, maybe less. I looked at Kendra's drink across the table, a vodka screwdriver. It was bright orange, just like my juice. To the naked eye, they were identical twins. Without a second thought, I reached out. My hand was steady as a rock. I slid my glass to her coaster and pulled her glass to mine. The condensation left a wet trail on the mahogany table. I wiped it away with my thumb just as they turned around. The trap was set. They came back breathless and glowing, fake smiles plastered on their faces. Bradley pulled out Kendra's chair like a gentleman. If only he was as good a son as he was an actor. He sat down and immediately looked at my place setting. His eyes darted to the glass in front of me. He smiled. It was a nervous, twitchy smile that I had seen 1,000 times when he was a teenager trying to hide a bad report card. "Did you miss us, Dad?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. I leaned back in my leather chair, gripping the armrests to keep from lunging across the table. "Not at all," I said, keeping my voice flat and calm. I was just admiring the atmosphere. I looked him dead in the eye, trying to find a trace of the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. I saw nothing but greed. Kendra laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. She adjusted her dress and reached for the glass in front of her. The glass that contained the powder. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a sick, twisted anticipation. I needed to know, was she in on it, or was my son so incompetent that he would let his wife drink poison by mistake? I watched her manicured fingers wrap around the stem. She lifted the glass. The ice cubes clinked softly. The rim touched her red lipstick. I did not move. I did not breathe. I just watched Bradley. He was busy checking a text message on his phone, completely oblivious. She tilted her head back. The liquid washed over her tongue. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. In that split second, I realized the true depth of the horror. My son was not just a killer. He was a careless amateur playing with human lives like they were cheap casino chips. I waited for the swallow that would seal her fate, or the realization that would start the war. The glass never made it to her throat. Bradley moved with the desperation of a man watching his inheritance evaporate. He lunged across the table, his hand striking the crystal goblet with a violence that silenced the entire restaurant. The sound of shattering glass was like a gunshot. Orange juice exploded outward, splashing across Kendra's white silk dress and dripping onto the expensive Persian rug. "Don't drink that!" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking. He stood there, panting, his chest heaving, his face pale as a sheet. Every head in the restaurant turned toward us. The music stopped. A waiter dropped a tray in the distance. Kendra stared at him, her mouth open in shock, orange liquid dripping from her chin. "What is wrong with you?" she shrieked, standing up and wiping furiously at her dress. "You ruined my outfit!" "There was a fly," Bradley stammered, his eyes darting around the room looking for an excuse that didn't exist. "A huge fly. It landed right in the drink." "I couldn't let you drink that, honey. It was disgusting. It was a lie so thin you could see right through it, but I knew it was my cue. If they wanted a medical emergency, I would give them one. I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go." I let out a low groan, gripping the edge of the table with my left hand and clutching my chest with my right. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced my breathing to become ragged and shallow. Dad, Bradley yelled, rushing to my side. "Dad, what is happening?" I allowed my body to go limp, sliding out of the leather chair and collapsing onto the floor. I kept my eyes slit just enough to see the panic on their faces. It wasn't concern for my life. It was panic that I might die in public before I signed over the money. "Call 911, a woman at the next table shouted, reaching for her phone. "He is having a heart attack." "No!" Kendra screamed. Her voice cut through the noise like a knife. She stepped in front of the woman, blocking her path. "Do not call anyone. He has a condition. This happens all the time." A manager in a tuxedo rushed over, looking terrified. Ma'am, he looks like he is in serious trouble. We need an ambulance. I said no. Kendra hissed. She grabbed Bradley by the shoulder. Get the car around front. Now. We are taking him to Dr. Sterling. He is the only one who knows how to treat this. I lay on the floor, fighting the urge to break character and strangle her. Dr. Sterling. I had never heard that name in my life. My cardiologist was Dr. Evans at Mount Sinai. Sterling wasn't a doctor, he was a fixer. I knew it in my gut. They weren't taking me to a hospital to save me. They were taking me to a black site to finish what they started. Help me up, Kendra ordered the manager. I made my body heavy, dead weight. As they dragged me toward the exit, my heels dragging on the carpet, I caught a glimpse of Dante, the security guard by the kitchen doors. He gave a subtle nod. He knew. They shoved me into the back seat of Bradley's SUV. The leather smelled of cheap cologne and betrayal. As Bradley peeled out of the parking lot running a red light, I realized the terrifying truth. I wasn't a patient. I was a prisoner. And the real fight for my life had just begun. The rain hammered against the roof of the black SUV like bullets as we sped through the slick streets of Manhattan. I lay slumped against the cold leather of the back seat, my body swaying with every sharp turn Bradley made. I kept my eyes closed, breathing in a shallow rhythm, fighting the adrenaline that wanted to make me sit up and snap their necks. I had to play the part of the dying old man. I had to be the victim they thought they had created. From the front seat, their voices drifted back to me. Bradley sounded like he was on the verge of hyperventilating. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard I could hear the leather creak. You gave him too much. Kendra, he stammered, his voice shaking. Look at him, he is barely breathing. If he dies before we get to the clinic, we are finished. I do not want a murder charge. Kendra's voice was ice cold, sharp enough to cut glass. Stop whining, Bradley. I gave him the exact dose needed to simulate a cardiac episode, not kill him yet. We need him alive until Monday morning. Once he signs the irrevocable trust transfer, then he can have his tragic heart failure. Her words hit me harder than any physical blow. Monday morning. That was the deadline. I was not a father to them, I was a walking ATM that needed to be emptied before being discarded. The betrayal burned in my gut, hotter than the imaginary poison. I felt a vibration in my jacket pocket. My secondary phone. Not the one they knew about, but the encrypted line I kept for security contractors. I had to text Harper, my lawyer. I needed to activate the GPS tracker. I waited until the car hit a pothole, jostling us violently. I let my hand slide down my side, slipping into the pocket. My fingers brushed the cool metal. I did not need to look. I knew the keypad by heart. SOS, send. Just as my thumb hovered over the button, the car screeched to a halt at a red light. The sudden inertia threw me forward slightly. The phone slipped from my grip and slid onto the beige leather seat. The screen lit up, illuminating the darkness of the cabin with a bright blue glow. Dad, Kendra's voice came from right beside me. I had not heard her turn around. She lunged over the center console, her perfume suffocating me. She grabbed the phone before I could react. So you are awake, she whispered. She did not sound surprised, just disappointed. She looked at the screen, reading the unfinished message. You really are a stubborn old mule, aren't you? She rolled down the window. A gust of wet wind blew into the car. Without a second thought, she tossed the phone out into the pouring rain. I watched my lifeline bounce on the asphalt and disappear under the tires of a passing 18-wheeler. You really should not have done that, Garrison, she said, using my first name for the first time. Now you have no one coming to save you. Bradley, drive faster. The locks clicked. I was trapped in a moving cage with two predators. I sank back into the seat, realizing that my acting days were over. They knew I was lucid, and that made me dangerous. But without a phone and trapped in a moving vehicle, I was also helpless. I needed a weapon, and all I had was my wits. The private clinic of Dr. Sterling smelled of expensive cologne and antiseptic. It was not a place of healing. It was a place where rich people paid to make their problems disappear, and tonight I was the problem. 2 orderlies lifted me onto a cold metal gurney, while Bradley paced back and forth in the corner, biting his fingernails until they bled. Kendra stood by the door, her arms crossed, watching me with the cold detachment of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. Sterling entered the room. He was a small man with a fake tan and a smile that showed too many teeth. He checked my pulse not out of concern, but to calculate how much chemical cocktail I could withstand. His eyes met mine, and I saw no mercy there, only greed. "He is agitated," Sterling said, turning to the nurse. "Prepare 5 milligrams of vecuronium. It will paralyze his skeletal muscles but keep him conscious. We need him awake enough to sign the papers in the morning, but quiet enough that he does not cause a scene." My blood ran cold. Vecuronium. I knew that drug from my days in the service. It would turn my body into a prison, leaving my mind trapped inside, unable to blink or scream while they did whatever they wanted. The nurse nodded and moved to a stainless steel tray next to my head. She drew the clear liquid into a syringe and set it down next to a saline flush syringe they used for IV lines. They looked identical. This was my only chance. Bradley dropped his phone on the linoleum floor with a loud clatter. "I cannot do this, Kendra," he whined, his voice cracking. "What if he never wakes up?" Kendra spun around her heels, clicking sharply on the floor. She grabbed Bradley by the lapels of his jacket and shoved him against the wall. "You coward," she hissed. "Pull yourself together, or I will leave you to deal with your debt collectors alone." The nurse turned her head to watch the drama. It was a split second of distraction. A lifetime of training took over. My hand moved with the speed of a striking cobra. I grabbed the syringe filled with the paralytic and shoved it under the pillow, swapping it with the harmless saline flush. I placed the saline syringe back on the tray at the exact angle it had been before. When the nurse turned back, I was lying motionless, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. Dr. Sterling walked over and picked up the syringe. He tapped the side to remove air bubbles. "This will just feel like a little pinch, Garrison," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Just relax and let us take care of everything." He plunged the needle into my arm. I felt the cool rush of saline enter my bloodstream. Now the real performance began. I had to act the part of a man whose body was shutting down. I forced my jaw to go slack. I let my eyelids droop until they were heavy and half-closed. I slowed my breathing to a shallow rhythm, suppressing the urge to swallow. "Is it working?" Kendra asked, stepping closer. Sterling lifted my arm high in the air and then let go. I let gravity take over. My arm fell like dead weight, striking the metal rail of the bed with a dull thud. I did not flinch. I did not react. I stared blankly ahead, focusing on a crack in the ceiling tile to keep from blinking. "He is under," Sterling confirmed. "He can hear us and he can see us, but he cannot move a single muscle. He is a living statue." Kendra leaned over my face, her breath hot against my cheek. She smiled a cruel, victorious smile. "Good night, Garrison," she whispered. "Rest up. You have a very busy day at the bank tomorrow." They left me alone in the dim light, thinking I was helpless. But under the sheets, my fist clenched tight. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought they had paralyzed me, but they had only bought themselves a ticking time bomb. The room was a tomb of silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed. I lay there staring into the darkness, my body rigid, my breathing shallow. I was a prisoner in my own skin, acting the part of a vegetable while my mind raced at 100 miles an hour. The heavy oak door creaked open, slicing a wedge of bright hallway light across the floor. 2 silhouettes stepped inside. I did not need to see their faces to know who they were. The smell of Bradley's nervous sweat and Kendra's overpowering Chanel perfume filled the air instantly. They did not whisper. Why would they? To them, I was just a piece of furniture, a sack of meat kept alive by machines and medicine. They stood at the foot of my bed, talking as if I were already in the ground. "Are you sure he is out?" Bradley asked, his voice trembling. He poked my foot through the blanket. "He looks like he is staring right at us." "He is gone, Bradley," Kendra replied, snapping her gum. "The vecuronium shut down his motor functions. His brain is mush. Stop being such a baby and focus on the plan. We have 48 hours. I heard the rustle of papers being spread out on the small rolling table, usually reserved for hospital meals. "Giovanni called again," Bradley said, and I could hear the terror in his throat. He said if he does not get the first installment of 10 million by Tuesday noon, he is going to start sending me pieces of myself in the mail. First a finger, then an ear. My internal temperature spiked. Giovanni. The name belonged to the head of the local crime syndicate, a man who ran underground gambling rings in Queens. So that was it. My son had not just made bad investments. He had gambled away his life, and now he was trading mine to save his own. "He will get his money," Kendra said coolly. "I have the power of attorney drafted. First thing Monday morning, we wheel the old man into Chase Bank. We use his retina scan to authorize the wire transfer of the entire 58 million into the shell company account in the Caymans. Once the money clears, we bring him back here." And then what? Bradley asked. And then Kendra paused, and I heard the click of a lighter. And then his heart gives out. A tragic complication from his stroke. We cremate him the same day. No autopsy, no evidence. We pay Dr. Sterling his cut, and we disappear to Zurich before Giovanni even realizes we are gone. I lay there motionless while a cold fury spread through my veins. Monday morning. I had less than 36 hours. They were not just stealing my legacy. They were planning to erase my existence. I was not a father to them. I was a transaction, a signature, a loose end to be tied up and burned. Kendra walked to the side of the bed. Smoke from her cigarette drifted into my face, stinging my eyes, but I forced myself not to blink. She leaned down and patted my cheek with a mocking tenderness. "Don't worry, Garrison," she whispered. "It will be painless. Consider it a late retirement gift." They laughed. They actually laughed. Then they turned off the lights and walked out, leaving me alone in the dark with the knowledge of my own execution date. But they had made a fatal error. They thought the game was over. They didn't know that the piece on the board they thought was captured was about to start a revolution. Monday morning wasn't going to be my funeral. It was going to be their judgment day. The digital clock on the wall flickered to 3 in the morning. I was still lying in the dark, counting the seconds until my execution. The numbness from the fake paralysis was purely psychological now, but the fear was very real. Suddenly, a metallic scrape echoed from the ceiling. I froze. Was this it? Were they sending an assassin to finish the job early? The ventilation grate in the corner of the room shifted. A pair of wet boots dangled down, followed by a large, shadowy figure landing silently on the linoleum floor. The figure stood up and wiped rain from his face. It was Dante, the security guard from the restaurant. I did not move. I did not know if he was here to save me or if Bradley had paid him to silence me. Dante crept to the side of my bed, his flashlight beam covered by his fingers, to let only a sliver of light escape. "Mr. Ford," he whispered, his voice rough with urgency. "If you can hear me, blink twice. I know you are in there." I followed the car. I used to be a detective in the Bronx, and I know a kidnapping when I see one. I did not blink. I sat up. Dante jumped back, nearly dropping his flashlight. "You can move," he gasped. I grabbed his arm, my grip iron tight. I switched the syringes, I hissed. "But we do not have time for explanations. My son is planning to kill me on Monday, but if we stay here, I won't make it to sunrise. Dante nodded, a grim smile crossing his face. I knew I liked you. Let's get you out of here. My car is parked 3 blocks away. He helped me to my feet. My legs were stiff from hours of lying still, but the adrenaline was a powerful fuel. We moved to the door. Dante cracked it open, peering into the hallway. The coast was clear. We slipped out, moving like ghosts toward the service elevator. Just as we turned the corner, heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Beams of tactical flashlights cut through the gloom. Check every room, a deep voice commanded. Dr. Sterling says the old man might be faking it. If he is awake, sedate him. Permanently. They were blocking the exit. There was no way back to my room and no way forward to the stairs. We were trapped in a long, narrow hallway with nowhere to hide. Dante grabbed my shoulder and pulled me toward a set of double doors marked with a biohazard symbol. We burst inside. It was not a closet. It was a temporary holding area for the deceased. The air was freezing cold and smelled of formaldehyde. In the center of the room stood a large stainless steel morgue cabinet used for transport. Get in, Dante whispered, pulling the handle of the bottom drawer. Are you crazy? I asked, staring at the dark metal coffin. It is the only place they won't look, he said, shoving me inside. I climbed into the cold steel tray, curling my body into a tight ball. Dante squeezed in beside me. It was a tight fit. He pulled the drawer shut just as the door to the room kicked open. Darkness swallowed us completely. I could feel Dante's heart beating against my back. Through the thin metal walls, I heard the heavy boots stomp into the room. It is empty in here, one guard grunted. His voice was so close he could have been standing right next to our heads. Check the vents, the other one said, and check the cabinets. My lungs burned. I held my breath. If they opened this drawer, we were dead men. The handle rattled. Someone was gripping it from the outside. I closed my eyes in the pitch black, preparing to fight for my life with nothing but my bare hands. The latch clicked. Light flooded the cramped steel drawer, blinding me for a split second. A face appeared in the opening, a generic hired thug with a shock of surprise in his eyes. He expected a corpse or an empty tray. He found a furious 72-year-old Marine. Before he could shout, I coiled my legs and unleashed a double kick straight into his chest. He flew backward, crashing into a rack of surgical tools with a deafening clatter. I scrambled out of the drawer, my joints screaming in protest, but my blood singing with adrenaline. The second guard fumbled for his taser, but Dante was faster. He slammed a heavy metal tray into the man's head, dropping him instantly. We ran. The corridor led straight to the loading dock, where the humid smell of rain mixed with the stench of medical waste. A box truck sat idling, its back doors open. Drive, Dante yelled, tossing me into the passenger seat, before jumping behind the wheel. He slammed the truck into gear, just as the door to the hallway burst open again. 3 more guards spilled out, guns drawn. Bullets pinged against the metal siding like angry hornets. Dante floored the accelerator. The truck roared, lurching forward with the grace of a dying elephant. We were not aiming for the exit ramp. We were aiming for the reinforced steel gate. Brace yourself, I shouted, gripping the dashboard. We hit the gate doing 40. Metal shrieked, tearing apart like paper. The truck shuddered violently, glass showering onto my lap, but we punched through, landing hard on the wet asphalt of the alleyway. We fishtailed onto the main avenue, merging into the chaotic rhythm of New York traffic. But the nightmare was not over. In the side mirror, I saw 2 black SUVs peel out of the clinic's driveway, their high beams cutting through the torrential downpour. They were not police. They were cleaners coming to wipe up a mess. Dante swerved across 3 lanes, cutting off a taxi. The heavy truck groaned under the strain. The SUV on our left pulled parallel to us. The window rolled down and I saw the glint of a suppressor. "Get down!" Dante screamed, jerking the wheel to the left. We sideswiped the SUV, slamming 5 tons of garbage truck into their expensive armor. The impact sent them spinning out of control across the slick road, crashing into a lamppost. I looked back, breathing hard. One down. But the second SUV was still on our tail, relentless and closing the gap. This was not a drive home. This was a war zone. The garbage truck rattled to a halt inside the cavernous darkness of the old warehouse on Pier 42. The engine sputtered and died, leaving us in a silence that was heavier than the storm raging outside. This place was a ghost from my past, a forgotten distribution center I had bought 20 years ago under a shell company name. To the world, it was an abandoned rust bucket. To me, it was the only sanctuary left. I groaned as I tried to climb down from the cab. My adrenaline was fading, replaced by the screaming pain in my joints and the deep bruising on my ribs where I had hit the dashboard. Dante was there in an instant. He didn't treat me like a fragile old man, but he offered his shoulder like a fellow soldier helping a wounded comrade. We limped into the small office at the back of the hangar. It smelled of dust and diesel, but it had electricity and running water. "Sit down," Dante ordered, pushing me onto a dusty leather sofa. He rummaged through a rusted metal cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit that looked like it hadn't been opened since the 90s. He poured rubbing alcohol onto a rag and pressed it against the cut on my forehead. The sting was sharp and grounding. It reminded me I was still alive. "We need to call the police," Dante said, reaching into his pocket for his burner phone. "We have enough evidence now. Attempted murder, kidnapping, the drugs in your system. We can have them in cuffs within the hour." I reached out and clamped my hand over his wrist. My grip was not as strong as it used to be, but my eyes were steady. "No police." Dante looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Mr. Ford, with all due respect, they tried to turn you into a vegetable. They are not going to stop. If we do not call the cops, we are just sitting ducks. If we call the police, they get lawyers," I said, my voice raspy but cold as steel. "They get bail. They get plea deals. Bradley will cry in front of a jury and say he was manipulated. Kendra will play the victim. They might spend a few years in a minimum security prison playing tennis." That is not justice, Dante. That is a slap on the wrist. I stood up, ignoring the pain shooting through my back. I walked to the dirty window, looking out at the rain lashing against the corrugated metal. I built an empire from nothing. I raised that boy. I gave him everything. And he looked me in the eye and tried to erase me. You do not discipline a dog that bites by petting it. You have to break it. Dante lowered the phone. "So what is the plan?" I turned back to him. "The plan is to let them think they have won. We let them walk into that bank on Monday morning. We let them think they are kings of the world. And then, when they are standing on the precipice, we push them off. I am not going to send my son to jail, Dante. I am going to destroy his world completely. I am going to teach him the one lesson I forgot to teach him when he was a child. Actions have consequences." I walked over to a loose floorboard in the corner of the room and pried it open. Underneath lay a waterproof box containing cash and surveillance equipment I had stashed years ago. I pulled out a laptop and a fresh set of clothes. "Tonight, we are not victims," I said, tossing a stack of bills to Dante. "Tonight, we are the hunters. Get some rest, son. Tomorrow we go back into the fire." The warehouse office was illuminated by a single flickering bulb that cast long, dancing shadows against the peeling paint of the walls. I sat at the rusted metal desk, my hands trembling, not from age or cold, but from the terrified anticipation of what I was about to find. In front of me lay the linen napkin, stiff with dried orange juice and a field testing kit I had pulled from the security supplies. It was an old kit, the kind we used to test drivers for substances back when I ran the logistics fleet, but chemicals do not lie. Dante stood by the door, watching the rain relentlessly assault the corrugated steel roof. He respected my silence. He knew that what was happening at this desk was not science. It was an autopsy of my relationship with my son. I cut a small strip from the stained napkin and dropped it into a test tube filled with distilled water. I watched the orange residue dissolve, turning the water a cloudy, pale yellow. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, painful rhythm. Part of me, the part that was still a father, was praying for a negative result. Please let it be a sleeping pill. Please let it be a sedative. Please let him be a thief, but not a monster. I reached for the reagent bottle labeled for cardiac glycosides. My hand hovered. This was the point of no return. Once I dropped this liquid into the tube, there would be no more excuses. No more pretending Bradley was just a wayward child under the influence of a bad wife. I squeezed the dropper. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3. Time seemed to stop. The only sound in the world was the rain and the ragged sound of my own breathing. I stared at the liquid, waiting for the color change. 10 seconds. 20. And then it happened. The pale yellow solution swirled and darkened, turning a deep, unmistakable violet. I stopped breathing. The test tube slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. But I did not care. I knew that color. Digoxin, derived from the foxglove plant. In small doses, it treats heart failure. In the dose he had poured into my glass, it stops the heart completely. It mimics a massive myocardial infarction, leaving no trace for a standard autopsy unless you are looking for it. He did not want to put me to sleep. He wanted to kill me. I leaned back in the creaking chair and covered my face with my hands. A sound escaped my throat, a guttural, animalistic noise that was half sob and half growl. I saw flashes of memory. Bradley at 5 years old, scraping his knee and running into my arms. Bradley at graduation, looking so proud. Bradley tonight, smiling as he handed me a glass of death. Mr. Ford, Dante said softly, stepping away from the door. I looked up. My eyes were dry. The tears had evaporated in the heat of a sudden, freezing rage. My son was dead. The boy I raised died the moment he poured that powder. The man who walked in his skin was a stranger and a murderer. I stood up, kicking the chair aside. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, tactical clarity. I walked to the window and looked out at the storm. He tried to stop my heart. I whispered, my voice low and steady. So now I am going to stop his cash flow. Dante, get the satellite phone. It is time to call Harper. We are going to freeze their world until they burn. Dante handed me the satellite phone. It was a heavy brick of a device, military grade and completely untraceable. I stepped into the corner of the office, away from the window, where the storm was still battering the glass. My fingers dialed the number I had memorized decades ago. It rang once. Harper speaking. His voice was crisp, alert, even at this ungodly hour. He was the only lawyer in New York who valued loyalty over billable hours. It is me, I said, my voice low. We are at DEFCON 1. Initiate the shadow freeze. There was a pause on the other end. A heavy, pregnant silence. Harper knew what that meant. It was the nuclear option. A financial failsafe we had designed years ago for a hostile takeover scenario. It meant locking down the entire empire while making it look like business as usual. Are you sure? Garrison Harper asked quietly. Once I flip this switch, there is no going back. The assets will show as available, but any attempt to move a single cent out of the accounts will trigger an infinite pending loop. It will look like a banking glitch, but it is a digital tone. Do it, I commanded. And Harper, make sure the alert notifications come directly to this secure line. I want to know exactly when they try to bleed me dry. Done. Protocol is active. Stay safe, old friend. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, feeling a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for the rat to take the cheese. Across town, in the master bedroom of my own house, Bradley was sitting at my mahogany desk. I could picture him perfectly. He would be sweating despite the air conditioning, his hands shaking as he logged into my private banking portal. He had stolen my passwords weeks ago, thinking he was clever. He didn't know I had let him keep them just for this moment. The screen would show the balance. $58 million. A fortune. Enough to pay off his gambling debts 5 times over and still live like a king. He probably smiled that weak, greedy smile of his as he typed in the routing number for the offshore shell account his creditors had provided. $10 million. That was the price of his life. He clicked transfer. I watched the second hand on the clock on the warehouse wall tick by. 1, 2, 3. In my mind, I saw the spinning wheel on his screen, the processing icon that usually lasted seconds but was now dragging into minutes. Bradley would be tapping his foot. He would be refreshing the page, and then the message would appear. Not denied, not rejected. Just pending. Transaction under review. My burner phone buzzed. A text from the bank's security system. Attempted wire transfer. 10 million USD. Status frozen. I smiled. At the house, Bradley was undoubtedly slamming his fist against the desk. He would try again. And again. Smaller amounts. Different accounts. But the result would be the same. He was swimming in a pool of gold, but he couldn't take a sip. The panic would be setting in now. The realization that the money was right there staring him in the face but completely out of reach. He was not a millionaire. He was a dead man walking, and he didn't even know who had locked the vault. The desperation would make him sloppy, and sloppy men make mistakes. The satellite phone on the desk buzzed with a rhythmic intensity that matched the storm outside. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly what was happening. The notifications on the screen told the story better than any spy. Transaction failed. Access denied. Biometric verification required. Bradley was trying to move $10 million to an offshore account, and the bank's security system was shutting him down cold. I could picture the scene in my living room perfectly. Bradley would be staring at the computer screen, sweat dripping onto the keyboard, and then his phone would ring. It would not be a telemarketer. It would be the creditors. The men who did not send late notices but sent pictures of surgical tools. I imagined the voice on the other end, calm and terrifying, telling my son that if the money did not arrive within the hour, they would start collecting his debt in flesh, one finger at a time. Panic makes people stupid, but fear makes them sharp. Kendra would be the one to figure it out. She would realize that the shadow freeze I had activated was a high-level security protocol. It meant that passwords were useless. To move that kind of money, they needed the account holder physically present. They needed my thumbprint. They needed a scan of my iris. They did not need me dead anymore. They needed me alive, and they needed me immediately. Dante shouted from the other side of the warehouse. "Mr. Ford, turn on the TV." "Channel 4. I walked over to the small, dusty television set sitting on a stack of crates. The screen flickered to life, showing a breaking news banner. A reporter was standing in the rain outside Dr. Sterling's clinic. "A citywide manhunt is underway tonight," she announced for business mogul Garrison Ford. "Family members say the 72-year-old suffers from advanced dementia and wandered away from his care facility earlier this evening." The camera panned to Bradley. He looked disheveled. His tie loosened, his eyes wide with a frantic energy that the world mistook for concern. "Please," he pleaded into the microphones, holding up a picture of me. "If you see my father, do not approach him alone. He is confused. He is having hallucinations. He might claim people are trying to hurt him. It is the disease talking. Please just call the number on your screen." Kendra stepped up beside him, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "We just want him home safe," she sobbed. "He is off his medication. He is a danger to himself." I stared at the screen, my hands clenching into fists. It was a masterstroke. They had just weaponized the entire city against me. By declaring me insane, they had inoculated themselves against the truth. If I ran to a police station now and screamed about poison and kidnapping, the officers would just see a senile old man having an episode. They would call Bradley to come pick me up. Dante kicked a metal bucket, sending it clattering across the concrete floor. "They boxed us in," he growled. "We cannot go to the cops. We cannot walk down the street. Every good Samaritan in New York is looking for you to claim that reward." I watched Kendra's face on the screen. She was looking directly into the camera lens, and for a second, I felt like she was looking right at me, daring me to make a move. She thought she had cornered me. She thought she had cut off every escape route. "Turn it off," I said, my voice low and calm. Dante hit the power button, plunging the room back into semi-darkness. "What do we do now, Mr. Ford? We are stuck." "No," I said, turning away from the blank screen. "They want a confused old man who needs to be saved." "Fine. I will give them exactly what they want. They invited the wolf into the sheep pen, Dante. They just do not know it yet. Get the car ready. We are going home." The news broadcast played on a loop. My face was plastered across every screen in the city, labeled as a senile runaway. The narrative was perfect. The caring son begging for his father's return. The devoted daughter-in-law wiping away tears. I was no longer a victim of a crime. I was a confused old man who needed to be saved from himself. I paced the small office of the warehouse, the concrete floor cold beneath my boots. They had turned my own reputation against me. If I stayed hidden, I was just proving them right. If I ran, I was a fugitive. There was only one move left on the board, the move they least expected. "I am going back," I said, stopping in front of the cracked mirror on the wall. Dante looked up from his laptop, his eyes wide. "Mr. Ford, that is suicide. They tried to kill you 3 hours ago. You walk back in there, and they will finish the job before you even get through the front door." "No," I shook my head, grabbing a pair of rusted scissors from the desk. "They can't kill me now, not when the whole city is watching. They need me alive to sign those papers on Monday. If I disappear, they get nothing. If I die mysteriously tonight, they get investigated. But if I wander home confused and helpless, they win. Or so they think." I brought the scissors to my clothes. I cut a tear in the sleeve of my jacket. Then I ripped the hem of my pants. I rubbed dirt from the floor onto my face and hands. I messed up my hair until I looked exactly like the man they described on TV. A broken, lost old soul. "You want to play the part?" Dante asked, standing up slowly. "I am going to win an Oscar for this," I growled. "I need to get back inside that house. I need access to Kendra's computer. I need to know where the money is really going, and I need to record them admitting to the plan." Dante grabbed my shoulder. "Garrison, listen to me. This is not a boardroom. These people are desperate. If they sense even for a second that you are lucid, then you better be ready to kick down the door," I interrupted. I pulled the small tracking device from the spy kit and slipped it into the lining of my boot. "I will keep this on. If my heart rate spikes, or if I stop moving for more than 10 minutes, you call Harper and you bring the cavalry." Dante sighed, shaking his head, but he knew I was right. It was the only way to get the undeniable proof we needed. I stepped out into the rain, letting the water soak my clothes and wash away the last traces of the strong, capable CEO. I slumped my shoulders. I let my jaw hang loose. I practiced the vacant stare of a man whose mind has drifted away. "Get the car, Dante." I whispered, my voice already taking on the tremor of the character I was about to become. "Take me home. It is time for the prodigal father to return." The rain washed away the last traces of dignity I had left, turning my expensive suit into a sodden, heavy rag that clung to my shivering frame. I stood at the end of the driveway, staring up at the mansion I had built brick by brick. To the world inside, I was about to become a ghost. I slumped my shoulders, curving my spine until I lost 3 inches of height. I let my jaw go slack, forcing my mouth to hang open until a string of saliva gathered at the corner of my lip. I did not wipe it away. I was not Garrison Ford, the CEO, anymore. I was a shell, a broken vessel. I shuffled up the stone path, dragging my left foot with a rhythmic scraping sound that echoed in the quiet night. I reached the massive oak front door and leaned my forehead against it, banging it weakly with a limp fist. When the door opened, warm light spilled out, blinding me for a second. Kendra stood there holding a glass of red wine. Her eyes widened. For a split second, I saw genuine fear before it hardened into that familiar icy calculation. "Bradley," she screamed over her shoulder, not taking her eyes off me. "Get down here." He came back. I stumbled into the foyer, dripping muddy water onto the pristine marble floor. I looked around with wide, empty eyes, pretending to see things that were not there. "The bus," I mumbled, my voice cracking and high-pitched. "I missed the school bus, Mom. Is dinner ready?" Bradley came running down the stairs, his shirt untucked, his face pale. He stopped dead when he saw me. He looked at my wet clothes, my vacant stare, and the drool on my chin. He let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Oh my God," he whispered. "The drugs. They fried his brain. He thinks he is a child." Kendra did not look relieved. She walked around me slowly like a shark circling a wounded seal. She leaned in close, sniffing the air around me, looking for a wire, looking for a sign of deception. I stared right through her, focusing on a speck of dust on the chandelier. "I do not know, Bradley," she said softly, taking a long drag from her slim cigarette. "This seems too convenient. 1 minute he is missing, the next he wanders home just in time for the bank transfer." "He is gone, Kendra," Bradley argued, walking over to grab my arm. "Look at him. He is not in there anymore." "Dad? Dad, can you hear me?" I giggled, a hollow, senseless sound. "I like the blue one," I said, pointing at a vase that was clearly red. Kendra narrowed her eyes. Her face twisted into a mask of cruelty. She took another drag of her cigarette, the cherry glowing a bright, angry orange. "Let's make sure," she hissed. She reached out, and without a shred of hesitation, pressed the burning tip of the cigarette into the back of my hand. The pain was instantaneous and blinding. It felt like a white-hot nail being driven into my skin. The smell of singing hair and burning flesh drifted up to my nose. Every nerve ending in my body screamed at me to recoil, to slap her, to roar in anger. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to explode. But the Marine in me took control. I locked my muscles. I disconnected my mind from my hand. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not stop giggling at the red vase. She held the burning ember against my skin for 3 agonizing seconds. 1, 2, 3. When she finally pulled it away, a dark, ugly blister had already formed, surrounded by angry red skin. I didn't even look at it. I kept my eyes fixed on the vase, humming a nursery rhyme under my breath. Bradley looked like he was going to be sick. "Jesus, Kendra, that was unnecessary." "It was necessary," she replied, flicking ash onto the floor. "But you are right. The lights are on, but nobody is home. He is a vegetable, Bradley. A vegetable with a bank account." She turned her back on me, dismissing me as a threat. "Lock him in the storage room," she ordered. "We will clean him up in the morning." I continued to hum, swaying on my feet, while the throbbing pain in my hand served as a constant reminder. They thought I was broken. They didn't know that the burn on my hand was just fuel for the fire that was about to consume them. I had passed the test. Now I was inside, and the Trojan horse had just opened its eyes. The smell of mildew and old cardboard filled my nose as Kendra shoved me into the small storage room under the main staircase. It was a space meant for winter coats and forgotten holiday decorations, not for a human being. I stumbled, catching myself on a stack of dusty magazines, my burned hand throbbing with a violent rhythm that synced with my heartbeat. "Stay there and keep quiet," Kendra hissed, standing in the doorway. Her silhouette was framed by the warm golden light of the hallway, the life I had paid for, continuing just inches out of reach. Bradley stood behind her, looking at his shoes. He could not even look me in the eye. "Are we really going to leave him in there all night?" Bradley asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad is 72. He needs water. He needs a bed. He needs to shut up and stay put," Kendra snapped, turning on her husband with the ferocity of a viper. "Do not get soft on me now, Bradley. Remember the debt. Remember the guys with the pliers. This old man is the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave in the Pine Barrens." She grabbed the door handle. "Listen to me closely, Bradley. Tomorrow morning we drag him to the bank. We get the biometric authorization. We transfer every single cent. And the moment the money clears, we drive him straight to the state asylum. I already printed the admission forms. We will tell them he is violent and unrecognizable. By the time anyone figures out who he is, we will be sipping champagne in Zurich." "The asylum," Bradley repeated, the word hanging heavy in the air. "It is better than he deserves," she said coldly. "Now lock the door." The heavy door slammed shut, plunging me into absolute darkness. I heard the deadbolt slide home with a final metallic click. I was alone. I did not bang on the door. I did not cry out. I sank down onto the cold concrete floor, leaning my back against a plastic bin filled with Christmas ornaments. My hand felt like it was on fire, the blister from her cigarette bubbling and raw. I cradled it against my chest, using the pain to sharpen my focus. In the darkness, time seemed to stretch and warp. My stomach growled a hollow ache, reminding me I had not eaten since lunch. My throat was parched. But physical discomfort was an old friend. I had survived weeks in the jungle with nothing but rice water and determination. I could survive a night in a closet in Connecticut. I closed my eyes and listened. I heard their footsteps retreating to the kitchen. I heard the pop of a cork. They were celebrating. They were drinking my wine, toasting to my demise and their future wealth. Let them drink, let them get comfortable. Let them lower their guard. I controlled my breathing, slowing my heart rate, conserving every ounce of energy. I was not a prisoner waiting to be discarded. I was a soldier in a foxhole waiting for the enemy to sleep. The darkness was not my cage, it was my cover. And when the house finally went quiet, when the last light was extinguished, I would not be the confused old man they threw in here. I would be the nightmare they never saw coming. I waited for the silence. The house settled into a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic settling of the timber beams and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I waited until the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2 in the morning before I made my move. The lock on the storage room door was a simple interior privacy latch meant to keep children out, not a former Marine. I found a wire hook from a dusty Christmas wreath and straightened it with my good hand. The burn on my other hand throbbed in time with my pulse, a constant angry reminder of why I was doing this. I slid the wire into the keyhole. It took me less than 10 seconds. The tumblers clicked and the door swung open silently. I stepped out into the hallway, moving like smoke. The marble floor was cold against my bare feet, but I made no sound. I was a ghost in the house I had paid for, creeping past the portraits of the family that was trying to kill me. I headed straight for the study. It used to be my sanctuary, a place of leather books and cigar smoke. Now it was Kendra's command center. The air inside smelled of her perfume and ambition. I moved to the desk and woke up her laptop. It was password protected, of course, but I didn't need her password. I pulled an encrypted USB drive from my pocket, the one Dante had prepared for me at the warehouse. I plugged it in. The screen flickered as the brute force software went to work bypassing her security protocols and installing a mirror program. A progress bar appeared on the screen. 10%, 20%. It was moving agonizingly slow. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked above me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze, my eyes fixed on the open doorway. Heavy footsteps thudded on the stairs. It was Bradley. He was coming down. I looked at the screen. 60%. I couldn't pull the drive yet, or the installation would corrupt and alert her. I had to wait. The footsteps hit the ground floor. I dove under the massive oak desk, curling my body into the tight space where the wastebasket used to be. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle the sound of my own breathing. The kitchen light flicked on, casting a long, jagged shadow across the hallway floor that stretched all the way into the study. I heard the clink of a glass and the sound of water pouring from the tap. Bradley was thirsty. Or maybe he was just trying to drown his guilt. "I am sorry, Dad," I heard him mutter. His voice was thick with emotion echoing in the empty kitchen. "I did not have a choice. It was you or me." I squeezed my eyes shut. Hearing him say it out loud was worse than the poison. He wasn't just a pawn. He was a conscious participant. He started walking back toward the stairs. His shadow passed right by the study door. If he turned his head just an inch to the left, he would see the blue glow of the laptop screen lighting up the dark room. I tensed my muscles, ready to spring out and silence him if I had to. I prepared myself to attack my own son. But he didn't look. He kept walking, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his sins. The stairs creaked again as he ascended back to his wife and his nightmares. I scrambled out from under the desk. The screen read 100%. Installation complete. I yanked the drive out, wiped the desk for fingerprints, and slipped back into the shadows. I made it back to my storage room prison and locked the door from the inside just as the clock chimed the quarter hour. I was safe. And now I saw everything. I huddled in the cramped corner of the storage room, using my damp jacket to shield the pale blue glow of the miniature smartphone I had concealed inside the lining of my boot. The spyware I had risked everything to install on Kendra's laptop was working perfectly, beaming every file and keystroke directly to my palm in real time. I ignored the throbbing pain in my burned hand and scrolled past the fake medical records and the drafted power of attorney forms until I found a folder buried deep in a subdirectory labeled simply Escape. My thumb hovered over the file. I expected to find offshore bank account numbers, or maybe a list of non-extradition countries. What I found was far more personal and far more devastating. It was a flight confirmation from Swiss International Airlines. Flight LX-14 departing JFK tomorrow night at 11:30. Destination Zurich. One way. First class. I zoomed in on the passenger manifest, expecting to see my son's name next to his wife's. But Bradley Ford was not on the ticket. Passenger 1 was Kendra Ford. Passenger 2 was Vincent Ross. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold storage room. I knew Vincent. He was Kendra's personal estate attorney, a man who wore $5,000 suits and smiled like a viper. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Bradley was not a partner in this heist. He was the sacrifice. Kendra had never planned to pay off his $10 million gambling debt. She was going to use him to secure my biometric signature, steal my $58 million, and then vanish into the Alps with her lover. She was leaving Bradley behind to face the mob enforcers alone. My son was going to be tortured and killed while she sipped champagne in Europe. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Bradley pacing the floorboards above my head. He was terrified, sweating through his shirt, thinking he was fighting for his future. He had no idea that the woman he was betraying his own father for had already signed his death warrant. A cold, hard smile spread across my face in the darkness. This was not just evidence. This was a nuclear weapon. I did not need to fight them physically anymore. I just needed to wait for the perfect moment to show a jealous, desperate husband that his wife was plotting his murder. I closed the file and powered down the phone, slipping it back into my boot. The pain in my hand faded, replaced by the icy calm of a sniper who has just lined up the perfect shot. Let them sleep. Let them dream of their fortune. Tomorrow morning, inside the walls of the bank, I was going to turn their alliance into a slaughterhouse. I closed my eyes and waited for the sun to rise on Judgment Day. The sun was beginning to bleed through the cracks in the storage room door, painting thin lines of gray light across the dusty floor. I sat with my back against the wall, the satellite phone stashed back in my boot, replaced now by a tiny skin-colored earpiece I had retrieved from the spy kit. I slipped it into my ear canal. It was invisible to the naked eye, a piece of tech I hadn't used since a corporate espionage sweep 5 years ago. I tapped it twice. "I am in," Dante's voice crackled in my ear, clear as a bell. "Harper is positioned inside the bank. He is in the manager's office with the federal team. We have eyes on the street and inside the lobby. Do you copy?" "I copy," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "They are waking up. I can hear the shower running upstairs. Remember, do not move until I give the signal. I need them to think they have won until the ink is wet." "Understood," Dante replied. "Stay safe, Garrison." The heavy bolt on the door slid back with a harsh, metallic grind. I slumped sideways instantly, letting my mouth hang open, bringing the vacant look back into my eyes. The door swung open. Kendra stood there, already dressed in a sharp black business suit, looking every inch the grieving daughter-in-law. She held a travel mug of coffee in one hand and a bucket of soapy water in the other. "Rise and shine, sleeping beauty," she said, kicking my leg with the toe of her designer heel. "Today is the big day. We need to get you cleaned up. You smell like a wet dog." She didn't wait for me to move. She grabbed my collar and hauled me up. I let myself be dead weight, stumbling and groaning as she dragged me toward the downstairs bathroom. Bradley was waiting there, holding my best Italian suit, the charcoal gray one I wore to board meetings. He looked pale, dark circles under his eyes, telling me he hadn't slept a wink. "Wash him," Kendra ordered, tossing a washcloth at Bradley. "And make sure you cover that burn on his hand with concealer. We cannot have the bank tellers asking questions." For the next hour, I endured the humiliation of being scrubbed and dressed like a doll by the people planning to murder me. I stood passive as Bradley tied my tie, his hands shaking so badly he had to redo the knot 3 times. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a confused, frail old man in a $2,000 suit. But behind the glassy stare, I was checking the angles. I was calculating the distance to the door. I was ready. "He looks presentable," Kendra said, checking her watch. "Let us go. The car is waiting." "And Garrison," she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "If you make a single sound that is not yes or sign here, I will tell the doctors to lobotomize you instead of just sedating you. Do you understand?" I blinked slowly and drooled a little just to sell the act. "I want ice cream," I mumbled. Kendra rolled her eyes and shoved me toward the door. "You will get ice cream in hell. Move." The Chase International Tower loomed over us like a tombstone made of glass and steel, reflecting the gray morning sky of Manhattan. The black SUV idled at the curb, and for a moment nobody moved. I could feel the vibration of the engine through the leather seat, a low rumble that matched the tension coiling in my gut. This was it, the belly of the beast. Bradley got out first. He fumbled with the trunk, unfolding the wheelchair they had bought specifically for this performance. It was a nice touch. Nothing says helpless invalid quite like a wheelchair. He opened my door and helped me out, his hands trembling so violently that he nearly dropped me. I played my part, slumping my weight against him, letting my head loll to the side. "Careful, Bradley," Kendra snapped, stepping out of the car with the grace of a predator. "Do not drop him before we get the money." She draped a thick cashmere blanket over my lap. To the outside world, it looked like a loving gesture, a daughter-in-law keeping the old man warm. But beneath the soft fabric, I felt the hard plastic muzzle of a compact taser jamming into my kidney. One wrong move, Garrison, she whispered in my ear, her voice sweet as poison. And I will fry your liver right here on the sidewalk. Smile for the cameras. I let a string of drool escape my lip and stared blankly at the revolving doors. I did not smile, but I did not pull away from the weapon digging into my side. I simply nodded a jerky spasm of a movement that made me look even more pathetic. We entered the lobby. It was a cathedral of capitalism echoing with the sound of expensive shoes on polished marble. Security guards stood at every corner looking like statues in their dark uniforms. I scanned their faces. They were private contractors, not Dante's men. I had to trust that Harper had positioned his team on the upper floors. If I made my move down here amidst the civilians, it would be a bloodbath. Bradley pushed me toward the private elevator bank. His breathing was ragged, loud enough to be heard over the soft jazz playing in the background. He pressed the button for the 50th floor. The doors slid open, revealing a mirrored box that felt more like a coffin than a transport. We rolled inside. The doors hissed shut, sealing us in. The silence was suffocating. I watched the numbers climb on the digital display. 10, 20, 30. With every floor, the air grew thinner, and the pressure in the small cabin grew heavier. "We are almost there, Dad," Bradley said, his voice cracking. He was trying to convince himself more than me. "Just a few signatures, and we can go home." Kendra ignored him. She kept her hand under the blanket, her finger resting on the trigger of the taser. She stared at her reflection in the brass doors, fixing a stray hair. She looked calm, composed, and completely, utterly soulless. She had no idea that she was trapped in a box with the man who was about to destroy her. The elevator pinged softly as we hit the 50th floor. The doors opened. The stage was set. The executive suite on the 50th floor smelled of old money leather polish and fresh orchids. It was a room designed to intimidate, designed to remind you that you were small and the bank was a giant. I had sat at this mahogany table 100 times before negotiating mergers that changed the landscape of American shipping. Today I was being wheeled in like a sack of laundry to sign away my life's work. Mr. Vance, the branch manager, stood by the window overlooking the skyline. He turned as we entered, his face a mask of professional concern. I had called Vance personally the night I set up the shadow freeze protocol. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew that the man in the wheelchair was not a vegetable but a shark waiting to bite. He played his part perfectly. "Mr. Ford," he said, walking over with his hand extended. "It is good to see you again, sir, even under these difficult circumstances." Kendra cut him off before he could finish. She stepped in front of the wheelchair, blocking his path. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Mr. Vance. My father-in-law is not feeling well. We need to execute the transfer immediately so we can get him back to his medical facility." Vance looked at her, then at Bradley, who was wiping sweat from his upper lip with a handkerchief. "Of course, Mrs. Ford. We have the paperwork ready. But as you know, for a transfer of this magnitude, $58 million, we require dual authentication, biometric verification, and a wet signature." "Let's do it," Kendra snapped, tapping her foot on the plush carpet. Vance nodded to an assistant who placed a sleek silver device on the table. It was a retinal scanner. "Mr. Ford," Vance said, leaning down to my level, "I need you to look into the lens. Keep your eyes wide open." Kendra leaned down, her breath hot against my ear. Her hand under the blanket tightened on the taser. "Look at the machine, Garrison," she whispered. "Do it, or you will regret it." I slowly lifted my head, playing the part of the confused old man obeying a command. I leaned forward. The machine hummed. A beam of green light scanned my left eye. I held my breath. This was the key. Once the machine confirmed my identity, the shadow freeze would technically lift, allowing the funds to be accessed pending the signature. I had to let them think the door was open. The machine beeped a cheerful melodic sound. Identity verified. Garrison Ford. Bradley let out a long, shuddering breath. "It is done," he said, his voice trembling with relief. "The money. It is unlocked." "Not yet," Vance said calmly. He slid a thick document across the polished wood. It was the irrevocable trust transfer. The final nail in my coffin. He placed a heavy gold fountain pen on top of the paper. "We just need his signature here on the bottom line," Vance said. "Once the ink hits the paper, the funds will be wired to your account in the Caymans instantly." Kendra grabbed the pen and jammed it into my trembling hand. "Sign it," she ordered. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Bradley. Then I looked at Kendra. I gripped the pen, my hand shaking not from age but from the sheer force of the rage I was suppressing. I was about to sign something, all right, but it wasn't going to be my name. The heavy gold fountain pen felt cold and foreign in my fingers, like a weapon I had forgotten how to use. The nib hovered over the signature line, trembling with a violent rhythm that shook my entire arm. To the vultures watching me, it looked like the frailty of a dying man. But it was not weakness. It was the vibration of a coiled spring ready to snap. Kendra leaned in so close that her hair brushed against my cheek. Her perfume was suffocating, masking the scent of her desperation. She pressed the taser harder into my side, a sharp, painful point of pressure against my ribs hidden beneath the cashmere blanket. "Sign it, old man," she hissed, her voice barely a breath, a secret just between the executioner and the condemned. "Sign it, or I swear to God I will burn your nerves until you are screaming on this floor. Do it now." I looked down at the paper. The letters swam before my eyes. Irrevocable transfer. Total liquidation. It was a death certificate disguised as a bank form. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the money they wanted so badly. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed black and smooth. I did not write a G. I wrote a T. A sharp, jagged, vertical line. Bradley leaned forward, his eyes bulging out of his head. He was sweating profusely. "What is he doing?" he whispered, his voice high and panic-stricken. "That is not his name." I kept writing. R.A.P. Trap. I stared at the word. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever written. With a sudden flick of my wrist, I launched the heavy gold pen across the room. It spun through the air and clattered against the far wall, leaving a splatter of black ink on the pristine wallpaper, like a gunshot wound. Kendra gasped, pulling back in shock. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shrieked, reaching for the taser under the blanket. But she was too slow. I gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. I did not struggle. I did not falter. I exploded upward with the explosive power of a man who has been holding his breath for 24 hours. I kicked the wheelchair backward with my heel, sending it crashing into the mahogany conference table with a deafening crack of wood and metal. I stood tall, my spine straightening to its full 6'2" height. The stoop was gone. The tremors were gone. The drool was gone. I adjusted my tie with a slow, deliberate motion and brushed the imaginary dust from my lapels. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the terrified breathing of my son. Bradley fell back into his chair, his face draining of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. "Dad," he stammered, his voice small and terrified. "You can stand." I turned to look at him. My eyes were clear and cold, sharp as diamonds. "I am not just standing, son," I said, my voice booming in the silent room, no longer a rasp, but a command. "I am rising. You wanted my signature. You just got my verdict." Kendra stared at the word on the paper, then back at me, her mouth working silently, like a fish out of water. "Trap," she whispered, realizing too late that the cage door had just slammed shut behind her. The air in the room shifted instantly from a business transaction to a judgment hall. I took a step forward, and for the first time in his life, I saw my son look at me with true terror. Bradley looked at me like I was a corpse that had just climbed out of a grave to drag him back down with me. His mouth hung open, and his skin was the color of old ash. He tried to speak, but only a strangled squeak came out. He gripped the edge of the conference table so hard his knuckles turned white. The illusion of the powerful air crumbled instantly, leaving behind a terrified child who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I unbuttoned my jacket and smoothed out the wrinkles on my shirt. I looked at them with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" I asked, my voice filling the room with a calm, terrifying authority. "Did you really think you could drug a man who survived the Tet Offensive and just roll him into a bank like a sack of potatoes? You forgot who I am. You forgot that I built this world you are so eager to steal." "The play is over," I declared, my voice dropping an octave. "The curtain has fallen, and there will be no applause." Kendra was the first to snap out of the shock. Her predatory instinct kicked in, overriding her fear. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. She didn't care about the money anymore. She just wanted to hurt me. She reached into her blazer pocket, her hand diving for the compact taser she had threatened me with in the elevator. "You senile old bat!" she shrieked, her eyes wild. "I will finish this myself." She pulled the weapon free, the black plastic gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She lunged at me, her finger tightening on the trigger. Bradley screamed something incoherent, shielding his face. But she never reached me. The quiet, unassuming bank clerk who had been standing in the corner holding a tray of water bottles moved with a speed that defied physics. He covered the 10 feet between them in a blur of motion. Before Kendra could extend her arm, he was there. He grabbed her wrist with one hand and twisted it sharply. There was a sickening pop of cartilage followed by a scream that echoed off the glass walls. The taser clattered uselessly onto the carpet. In one fluid motion, he spun her around and pinned her arm behind her back, forcing her face down onto the polished mahogany table. The clerk looked up and winked at me. It was Dante. He had shaved his beard and was wearing a cheap suit and thick glasses, but the grin was unmistakably the same. "Bank security is very strict about weapons, ma'am," Dante said, his voice calm and mocking as he tightened his grip. "I am afraid I am going to have to confiscate this." Kendra thrashed against his hold, cursing and spitting like a trapped animal. "Let go of me," she yelled, kicking her legs. "Do you know who I am?" I walked over to where she was pinned. I leaned down until my face was inches from hers. "I know exactly who you are, Kendra," I whispered. "You are a broke woman with a broken wrist and a one-way ticket to a federal prison cell. And the best part is you did it all to yourself." Bradley sat frozen in his chair, staring at the taser on the floor. He looked from me to Dante, then back to me. The realization was slowly dawning on him. He wasn't just caught. He was completely outmaneuvered. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as the reality of their situation settled like concrete. They weren't the hunters. They were the prey, and the trap had just snapped shut. Bradley sat there, paralyzed, his eyes darting between me and his wife, who was still pinned against the table by Dante. He looked like a man waking up from a long coma, only to find his house on fire. I smoothed my tie and picked up the remote control lying on the conference table. "You think I am the villain here, Bradley?" I said, my voice soft, but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. "You think you did all of this to save your family, to save your marriage. But you never stopped to ask yourself what your wife was planning to save." I pressed the button. The massive 80-inch monitor on the wall flickered to life. Static hissed for a moment before the image sharpened. It was a recording taken from the camera I had installed in the study the night before. The angle was high, looking down at Kendra as she paced the room talking on her phone. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the bank's surround sound speakers. "Vincent, are the tickets ready?" Kendra's recorded voice echoed in the room. Her tone was light, almost giddy. "Yes, first class, one way." Bradley stared at the screen. "That is Vincent," he whispered. "That is her lawyer." On the screen, Kendra laughed. "Oh, don't worry about Bradley. He is staying here. I am leaving him as a parting gift for Giovanni and his debt collectors. By the time they start breaking his legs, we will be sipping martinis in Zurich. He is useless, Vincent. A pathetic gambling addict. I just needed him to roll the old man into the bank. Once the money is mine, he is dead weight. The recording cut to black, but the silence that followed was louder than any scream. Kendra stopped struggling against Dante's grip. She went limp, realizing that her exit strategy had just been broadcast in high definition. She turned her head slowly to look at Bradley. Her eyes were not apologetic. They were cold and defiant. Bradley stood up. He did not look like my son anymore. He looked like a wounded animal. His face twisted into a rictus of pure, unadulterated hate. His hands curled into claws. "You are going to leave me to die!" he screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. "I sold my father for you. I almost killed my own father for you. And you were going to leave me to be butchered." "Bradley, wait," Kendra started to say, but it was too late. He launched himself across the room. He didn't care about the security guards. He didn't care about the cameras. He crashed into Dante, pushing him aside just to get to her. He grabbed Kendra by her hair and slammed her back against the wall. "You traitor!" he shrieked, spitting in her face. "You used me!" They tore at each other right there on the plush carpet of the executive suite. It was a pathetic, vicious display. Two wolves who had run out of sheep turning on each other. Kendra scratched his face, drawing blood. Bradley shook her, violently screaming obscenities. It was ugly. It was raw. And it was exactly what they deserved. I stood back and watched, my arms crossed. I did not intervene. I let them destroy each other. I let them show the world exactly who they were. This was not a family. This was a nest of vipers, and finally, the venom was going where it belonged. Dante stepped back, adjusting his glasses, and looked at me. I gave a small nod. Let them fight for a minute longer. Let the hatred burn itself out. This was the true face of greed, stripped of its masks and its lies. "Enough," I shouted, my voice cutting through their screams like a thunderclap. The bank security guards finally stepped in, pulling Bradley off his wife and dragging them to opposite sides of the room. They stood there, panting, bleeding, disheveled, the picture of ruin. Bradley wiped blood from his lip and looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Dad." He choked out, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the blood. "You do not understand. They were going to kill me. Giovanni. He said he would cut me into pieces. I had to do it. It was $10 million or my life. You have to believe me." I looked at him with a heavy sadness that felt like a stone in my chest. $10 million. That is the price you put on my head. That is the price of your soul. I walked back to the head of the table and pointed the remote at the screen again. "You were so busy being afraid, Bradley, that you forgot who your father is. You forgot that I ran logistics for this city before you were born. You think I did not know about your gambling. You think I did not know about Giovanni." I pressed the button. The image of Kendra's betrayal vanished, replaced by a shaky handheld video feed. It was footage Dante had filmed just an hour ago from the dashboard of his car. It showed a warehouse by the docks, the same docks where I had spent the night planning my revenge. Rain was pouring down in sheets. Blue and red lights flashed against the wet pavement, reflecting in the puddles. Men in windbreakers, with those 3 yellow letters, FBI, on their backs, were marching a line of handcuffed men into a transport van. They were soaked, miserable, and completely neutralized. And there, in the middle of the line, head bowed, looking small and defeated, was a man in a silk suit. Giovanni. Bradley stared at the screen, his knees shaking so hard he could barely stand. "That is him," he whispered, his voice trembling. "That is Giovanni. He is not coming for you, son," I said, my voice quiet but filling every corner of the room. "He and his entire crew were picked up 40 minutes ago. Racketeering, extortion, attempted murder. They are going away for a very long time. You were never in danger. Not really. Bradley looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. But the deadline. He said noon today. Deadlines are for people who play by the rules, I said. If you had just come to me, if you had just been a man and confessed your mistake, I would have protected you. I would have handled it. I have friends in federal agencies who have been trying to pin Giovanni for years. All they needed was a witness. I could have saved you, Bradley. But you did not trust me. You chose the easy way out. You chose to kill the only person who would have actually stood between you and the fire. Bradley collapsed onto the carpet. The realization hit him harder than any punch. The monster under his bed was gone, but he had already burned down the house to escape it. He had committed the ultimate sin for absolutely nothing. He covered his face with his hands and began to weep ugly, broken sobs that echoed in the silent room. He wasn't crying because he was sorry. He was crying because he realized he was a fool who had thrown away a kingdom for a threat that no longer existed. Kendra pulled herself up from the floor, clutching her bruised wrist. Her hair was a mess, and her blouse was torn, but the avarice in her eyes was burning brighter than ever. She looked at the screen showing the arrested mobsters. Then she looked at me with a sneer that twisted her beautiful face into something hideous. I do not care about Giovanni, she spat, her voice shrill and vibrating with rage. I do not care about your little family drama. I want my money. The transfer was authorized. The biometric scan went through. Mr. Vance, complete the transaction. That $58 million is legally mine. She lunged toward the banker, slamming her good hand on the desk. Do it, she screamed. I started to laugh. It began as a low chuckle in my chest and grew into a roaring belly laugh that echoed off the glass walls. It was the laugh of a man who has watched a clown walk off a cliff. Kendra froze, staring at me like I had finally lost my mind. What is so funny? She hissed. Oh, Kendra, I said, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. You really did not do your due diligence, did you? You spent so much time planning how to kill me that you forgot to check what you were actually stealing. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city I used to own. Ford Logistics does not have $58 million. Ford Logistics does not have 58 cents. The company went bankrupt 14 months ago. I lost the contracts. I sold the fleet. The only thing left is the name and a mountain of debt. The room went dead silent. Bradley looked up from the floor, his face pale. What he whispered. But I saw the balance. I hacked your account. It said 58 million. I turned back to them, smiling. That is because the account does not belong to Ford Logistics. It belongs to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I let that sink in. I watched the color drain from Kendra's face until she looked like a wax statue. You see, son, I continued, my voice hard and unforgiving. When you started washing money for Giovanni through my shipping lanes, you did not just attract the attention of the mob. You attracted the feds. They came to me 6 months ago. They offered me a deal, helped them set a trap to catch the launderers and the people trying to steal the assets or go down with the ship. So we created a dummy fund, a honeypot. That $58 million was just digital bait on a hook. And you two, you swallowed it whole. Kendra staggered back, hitting the wall. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, that is impossible. You tried to murder a man for a ghost, I said, stepping closer to her. You drugged me. You kidnapped me. You tortured me. And you did it all for a bank account that doesn't exist. There is no fortune, Kendra. There is no Zurich. There is only a federal indictment for money laundering and attempted murder. You are not rich. You are not smart. You are just another rat caught in a government trap. I looked at the clock on the wall, and right on cue the elevator doors dinged open. But it wasn't clients stepping out. It was a tactical team in body armor, their weapons drawn, their badges glinting under the harsh office lights. The game was truly over. The elevator doors slid open with a cheerful chime that sounded obscenely bright against the impending doom. A wall of black uniforms poured into the executive suite like a breaking dam. The shout was singular and deafening. "Federal agents, get down, now!" Kendra screamed a high-pitched sound of pure terror as she was thrown against the mahogany paneling by a tactical officer. Bradley didn't even fight. He dropped to his knees instantly, his hands raised in surrender, shaking so hard, he looked like he was having a seizure. The room became a blur of motion. Weapons drawn, commands shouted. The sterile silence of the bank was shattered by the heavy boots of justice. Mr. Vance, the branch manager who had been so polite and so accommodating, reached into his suit jacket. But he didn't pull out a pen. He pulled out a gold badge on a chain and hung it around his neck. He walked over to where Bradley was kneeling and looked down with cold, professional detachment. Bradley Ford and Kendra Ford. He announced, his voice stripping away the customer service veneer to reveal the federal agent underneath. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it immediately." Bradley stared at the badge swinging in front of his face. His world fractured. He looked at Vance, then at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It was all a setup," he whimpered. "All of it." He crawled toward me on his hands and knees, dragging himself across the expensive carpet like a broken child. The handcuffs dangled from the agent's belt behind him, but Bradley ignored them. He grabbed the hem of my trousers, burying his face in the fabric. "Dad, please," he sobbed, his voice muffled and wet with snot and tears. "I am sorry. I was scared. You have to help me. Tell them. Tell them I was forced. Tell them I am your son. Please, Dad, do not let them take me. I will do anything. I will go to rehab. Just help me." I looked down at the top of his head. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike. I remembered his first baseball game. But I also remembered the taste of digoxin in my orange juice. I remembered the look in his eyes when he watched me fall to the floor in the restaurant. I did not move. I stood like a statue carved from ice. Kendra was not begging. As the agents wrenched her arms behind her back to snap the steel cuffs on her wrists, she started shrieking, twisting her body to look at Vance. It was him she yelled, pointing her chin at Bradley. It was all his idea. He is the gambler. He owes the money to the mob. He forced me to do it. I was a hostage. Check the records. I am a victim here. He said he would kill me if I didn't help him. Bradley stopped crying and looked up at his wife. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. "You wrote the plan," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You bought the poison. You called the doctor." "Shut up, you loser!" Kendra spat back, struggling against the agent's grip. "You couldn't even kill an old man, right? I should have done it myself." I watched them tear each other apart. The love was gone. The loyalty was gone. All that was left was the ugly, naked survival instinct of two rats trapped in a sinking ship. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Dante. "It is over, Garrison," he said quietly. "Let them go." I looked at my son one last time as the agents hauled him to his feet. He looked small, pathetic, and for the first time in 40 years, completely alone. The grip on my trouser leg was tight and desperate, the clutch of a drowning man, pulling down the only thing that could save him. Bradley was sobbing into the fabric of my suit, the expensive Italian wool soaking up his tears and snot. It was a pathetic display. A grown man of 40 reduced to a whimpering child because the consequences of his actions had finally caught up to him. "Dad. Please," he wailed, his voice muffled and broken. "I am your flesh and blood. You cannot let them take me to federal prison. I will die in there. I am your son." I looked down at him. For a fleeting second, I saw the ghost of the boy he used to be. The toddler who cried when he scraped his knee. The teenager who looked at me with hero worship when I came home from work. But that image was instantly superimposed with the man who had sat across from me at dinner and watched me drink poison. That man was not my son. That man was a stranger who had rented my son's skin. The FBI agents paused, waiting for my signal. They respected the gravity of the moment. They gave me the space to say goodbye. I did not bend down. I did not offer a comforting hand. I stood as rigid as a marble column. "Stand up, Bradley," I said, my voice low and devoid of any warmth. He looked up, his face red and swollen, hope flickering in his eyes. He thought I was going to save him. He thought that because I was his father, I was obligated to fix his mistakes, no matter how monstrous they were. He began to scramble to his feet, reaching out for my hand to steady himself. I did not take it. I let him stumble. "You say you are my son," I continued, my voice cutting through the air like a razor wire. "You say we are family. But family is not about DNA, Bradley. It is about code. It is about honor." I took a step closer, towering over him. "I taught you how to walk when your legs were too weak to hold you. I taught you how to speak so you could ask for what you wanted. I taught you how to be a man, how to look the world in the eye and stand your ground. I gave you every tool you needed to build a life of dignity." Bradley sniffled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I know, Dad. I know. That is why you have to help me." I shook my head slowly. "No. I failed you. Because I forgot to teach you the one lesson that actually matters. I forgot to teach you that you never sell out your commander. You never bite the hand that feeds you, and you never betray the man who would have died for you." He reached for me again, his fingers grasping for my sleeve. "Dad, please." I kicked his hand away. It was a sharp, violent motion, a physical rejection that hurt more than any blow. "Do not touch me," I growled. "You made your trade. You sold your father for $10 million. Now go and spend it in your cell." I turned my back on him. I heard him scream my name, a ragged, desperate sound that echoed down the hallway. I heard the agents chant the Miranda rights as they dragged him backward. I heard the elevator doors slide shut, cutting off his wailing. I stood alone in the center of the silent conference room. My chest felt hollow, as if someone had reached inside and ripped out my heart. But my head was high. I had lost a son, but I had kept my honor. And in a world of wolves, honor was the only currency that mattered. While the silence of the empty conference room settled around me, there was one final loose end that needed to be cut. I turned my attention back to the wall of monitors where Dante had pulled up a new feed. This one was not from a dashboard camera, but from the internal security system of a high-end medical suite on the Upper East Side. It was the office of Dr. Sterling, the man who had traded his Hippocratic oath for a payout from my daughter-in-law. The screen showed a sanctuary of beige leather and polished chrome. It looked less like a medical facility and more like a five-star hotel lobby. Sterling was sitting behind his glass desk, sipping an espresso and scrolling through his tablet. He looked relaxed. He looked arrogant. He looked like a man who thought he had committed the perfect crime. He probably thought I was already dead or drooling in a state facility by now. He had no idea that the check he was waiting for was never going to clear. I watched as he reached for the phone, probably to call Kendra and ask for his bonus, but he never got to dial the number. The double doors of his waiting room did not open. They exploded inward. A tactical team of federal agents swarmed into the pristine office, their boots leaving mud on the white carpet. Sterling dropped his coffee cup, sending dark liquid splashing across his expensive rug. He scrambled backward, his chair rolling into the wall with a dull thud. He tried to stand up. He tried to pull the mask of authority back over his face, but it was too late. "Federal agents." One of the officers shouted, his voice tinny through the speakers. "Dr. Sterling, step away from the desk and keep your hands where we can see them." I watched the color drain from Sterling's face. He started stammering, waving his hands in a frantic attempt to dismiss them. "You cannot be in here," he shouted. "This is a private practice. I have patient confidentiality. I know judges. I know senators." The lead agent didn't care about his Rolodex. He shoved Sterling against the wall, cuffing his hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. While two agents secured the doctor, the rest of the team went to work on the office. They weren't looking for billing records. They were looking for the kill kit. One agent pried open the hidden compartment behind a false diploma on the wall. I leaned in closer to the screen. There it was. The stash. Vials of unprescribed narcotics. Off-market sedatives. And right in the front, a small box labeled with a chemical warning. Digoxin. The same poison they had pumped into my system. Another agent was at the computer overwriting the password. "Got it," the agent said. I found the file. Garrison Ford. Patient notes created 3 weeks ago. Falsified diagnosis of Alzheimer's. There are emails here too. Emails from Kendra Ford discussing dosages and timelines. Sterling slumped against the wall. The fight went out of him instantly. He wasn't a hardened criminal like Giovanni. He wasn't a desperate gambler like Bradley. He was a coward who liked money. And now, faced with the hard reality of federal prison, he looked small and pathetic. I watched them march him out of his office past the shocked faces of his receptionists and wealthy patients. He had spent a lifetime building a reputation shown as a healer of the elite. In 5 minutes, it was all gone. He would not be remembered as a doctor. He would be remembered as the man who sold his ethics to help murder an old man. Dante walked up beside me, watching the feed go dark. "That is the last of them, Garrison. The doctor is in custody. The evidence is secured." I nodded slowly, feeling a heavy weight lift from my shoulders. "Justice is a bitter medicine," I said, turning away from the screen. "But Dr. Sterling is finally going to get a taste of his own prescription. The purge is complete, Dante. The cancer has been cut out. Now we can finally start to heal." The visiting room of the Federal Detention Center smelled of industrial bleach and despair. I sat on a bolted-down metal stool staring at my own reflection in the thick, scratched plexiglass that divided the free world from the caged one. It had been 7 days since the raid at the bank. 7 days since my son was dragged away in handcuffs, screaming for mercy. When the heavy steel door on the other side buzzed open, Bradley walked in. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, making him look smaller than I remembered. His hair was shaved off, and his face was gaunt. He did not look at me with the fear he had shown in the boardroom. Today, his eyes were filled with a cold, simmering resentment. He sat down and picked up the black phone receiver. I did the same. "Are you happy now?" he asked, his voice tinny and distorted through the speaker. "You got your justice. You destroyed my life. I hope it was worth it." I looked at him calmly. "I did not destroy your life, Bradley. I just stopped you from ending mine. There is a difference." He scoffed a bitter, ugly sound. "You set me up, that fake account, the bankruptcy. You played me like a fiddle. You are cruel, Dad. You have always been cruel. You treated me like a recruit in your little army, never like a son. You pushed me until I broke. This is on you. You made me this way because I have your cold blood running through my veins. I am a monster because I came from a monster." I listened to him rewrite history, trying to turn himself into the victim. He needed to believe it. It was the only way he could sleep at night in that cell. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a piece of paper. It was not a legal document. It was old, folded into a small square, the edges yellowed with age. I unfolded it and pressed it against the glass. "Read it," I said softly. Bradley squinted, reading the faded type. It was a DNA paternity test dated 32 years ago. "What is this?" he asked, frowning. "It is the truth," I said. Your mother. She made a mistake when you were an infant. A brief affair with a tennis instructor. I found out when you were 2 years old. I ran the test because I had suspicions. The results were conclusive. 0% probability of paternity. Bradley went still. The phone shook in his hand. He looked at the paper, then at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. You knew, he whispered. You knew for 30 years. I nodded. I knew every time I tucked you into bed. I knew every time I paid for your tuition. I knew every time you called me Dad. I could have walked away. I could have divorced your mother and sent you both packing. But I didn't. I burned the other copy of this test. I made a choice, Bradley. I chose to be your father. I chose to love you. I chose to give you my name and my legacy. I leaned closer to the glass, my eyes locking onto his. So do not sit there and blame your blood. Do not blame your genetics. You are not a traitor because you are a Ford. You are not a traitor because you are a Miller. You are a traitor because you are a weak man who chose money over loyalty. I gave you everything a father could give a son, including the truth that you never belonged to me. And yet, I kept you. Bradley stared at me, and for the first time the hate in his eyes was replaced by a crushing hollowness. The narrative he had built that he was just a bad seed from a bad tree had been shattered. He wasn't destined to be this way. He chose it. I stood up and hung the phone back on the cradle. The line went dead, severing the last connection between us. Goodbye, Bradley, I said through the glass, even though he couldn't hear me. I turned and walked toward the exit. I didn't look back. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind me with a final resounding thud. I walked out into the sunlight, a free man. I had lost a son I never really had, but I had found my peace. The ledger was balanced. The file was closed. The yellowed piece of paper in my hand felt fragile like the dry skin of a dead thing. It was the only physical proof of the secret I had carried for 30 years, the only document that explained why my son was a stranger to me, even before he became a criminal. Bradley stared at it through the thick glass, his eyes darting back and forth between the torn edges and my face. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground beneath his feet dissolve into nothingness. He realized then that he had not just lost a father, he had lost his entire identity. He was not the heir to an empire, he was just a ghost in a story that didn't belong to him. I slowly brought my hands together and tore the document in half. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet room, like a dry twig snapping in a winter forest. Bradley flinched as if I had struck him. I put the two halves together and tore them again and again. I shredded the past into confetti, letting the pieces fall from my fingers to the cold linoleum floor. They scattered like dirty snow, a lifetime of lies and misplaced loyalty finally discarded. That is it, I said, my voice devoid of anger, devoid of sadness, just empty. The contract is terminated. You are on your own, Bradley. I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and yet it was the easiest. It felt unnatural to walk away from a child you raised, but I reminded myself that the child was gone. The man sitting in that orange jumpsuit was a predator who had tried to eat me alive. Hey, Bradley shouted, his voice cracking through the speaker. Hey, wait. You cannot just leave. Come back here. Dad. Dad, look at me. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I walked toward the heavy steel door that led to the outside world. Behind me, I heard the receiver slam against the glass. Then came the thud of a fist, then another. The sounds grew more frantic, a rhythmic, desperate pounding that vibrated through the floor. Dad, he screamed. Don't you walk away. I have nobody. You hear me? I have nobody. His voice rose to a shriek, a raw, animalistic sound of pure terror. It was the sound of a man realizing he is truly alone in the universe. It echoed off the concrete walls, bouncing around the sterile room like a trapped bird. But I kept walking. I signaled the guard in the booth. The buzzer sounded a harsh electric tone that drowned out the screaming for a brief second. The heavy door slid open with a metallic groan. I stepped through the threshold, moving from the artificial fluorescent gloom of the prison into the bright, blinding light of the corridor. The door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Bradley's voice, as if a switch had been flipped. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. I walked down the long hallway, my footsteps clicking steadily on the polished floor. I adjusted my jacket. I straightened my tie. I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden was gone. The war was over. I pushed open the final set of doors and stepped out into the fresh air. The wind hit my face cold and clean, smelling of rain and asphalt and freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the world. I did not look back at the gray fortress behind me. I just looked forward at the road ahead. I was Garrison Ford, and for the first time in a long time, I was just a man. The wind off the harbor was brisk, carrying the scent of salt and diesel, but tonight it did not smell like fear. It smelled like victory. I stood at the edge of Pier 42, looking out at the dark water where the city lights danced in the reflection. This was where I had come to die, or so I thought, 3 nights ago. This was where I had huddled in a cold warehouse, bleeding and betrayed. Now it was just a dock again, a place of commerce, a place of beginnings. Dante was leaning against the hood of his sedan, watching the seagulls circle overhead. He did not ask why I wanted to meet here. He never asked unnecessary questions. That was the thing about Dante. He operated on a frequency of absolute trust. He had risked his life, his freedom, and his safety to save an old man who had nothing left but a grudge. He had done it without asking for a paycheck. He had done it because he possessed the one thing my own family lacked: honor. I walked over to him, my shoes clicking a steady rhythm on the wooden planks. He straightened up, respectful as always, ready for the next order. But there were no more orders to give. The war was over. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a heavy velvet box. I tossed it to him. He caught it with one hand, his reflex sharp as ever. He looked at the box, then at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Open it," I said, leaning back against the railing. He flipped the lid, revealing a set of silver keys and a keycard with a gold chip embedded in the plastic. He looked up at me, bewildered. "Penthouse A at the Millennium Tower," I said. "It is fully furnished. The view is better than mine used to be, and the deed is already recorded in your name. No mortgage, no taxes. It is yours." Dante shook his head, trying to hand the box back. "Mr. Ford, I cannot accept this. I did not do this for a bonus. I did it because it was the right thing to do. You do not owe me anything." I pushed his hand back gently. "You are right, Dante. I do not owe you anything. I owe you everything. But that is just the housing allowance." I handed him a thick leather folder I had been holding under my arm. Inside were the incorporation papers for a new company. Not a logistics firm, not a shipping empire. "Read the header," I instructed. He looked down at the document. "Ford and Ross Security Consulting." He paused, staring at the name Ross. That was his last name. He looked at the equity split. 50-50. "I am too old to build another empire alone," I said, looking out at the skyline. "And I am done trusting people just because they share my last name. I learned the hard way that blood is just biology. Loyalty is a choice. You chose to stand by me when the whole world walked away. That makes you more family than Bradley ever was." Dante looked at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't a man who showed emotion easily, but I saw the shine in his eyes. He realized that he wasn't just an employee anymore. He was a partner. He was a son in every way that mattered. "We have a lot of work to do," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. We are going to clean up this city. We are going to protect people who cannot protect themselves. Are you ready, partner? Dante closed the folder and looked me in the eye. He smiled a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. I am ready, Garrison, he said. We stood there for a moment, two men from different worlds bound together by fire and survival. The past was floating away with the tide. The future was waiting. And this time I knew exactly who to trust. The heavy oak doors of the obsidian swung open with a familiar hush. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered it. The same velvet curtains draped over the windows. The same soft jazz piano drifting through the air like smoke. The same scent of truffle oil and expensive perfume. To anyone else, it was just a Tuesday night in Manhattan. To me, it was a return to the scene of the crime. But tonight, I was not walking in as a victim. I was walking in as a survivor. I moved through the dining room, my stride confident and steady. There was no cane. There was no stumbling. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. His eyes widened slightly, perhaps remembering the ambulance and the commotion from 3 weeks ago. But he recovered quickly, bowing low, with a professional smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Ford," he said, pulling out the chair at the head of the corner table. "We are honored to have you with us again." I sat down. To my left sat Harper, looking relaxed for the first time in 20 years, his tie loosened, and a genuine smile on his face. To my right sat Dante, wearing a suit that cost more than his old car, looking every bit the partner I had made him. The table was set for 3. There was no fourth chair. There was no space for betrayal tonight. The waiter approached, holding a leather-bound wine list. He looked young and eager. "Can I start the table with some refreshments, sir? Perhaps some fresh squeezed orange juice?" The table went silent. Harper stopped smiling. Dante shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing at the waiter. The poor boy had no idea why the air in the room had suddenly dropped 10 degrees. I looked at the waiter, and then I started to chuckle. It was a warm, genuine sound. "No, son," I said, shaking my head. "I think I will pass on the citrus tonight. We are celebrating. Bring us the Cabernet, the vintage reserve, and bring 3 glasses." The tension broke. The waiter scurried away, relieved. Harper let out a breath and laughed. "You have a twisted sense of humor, Garrison. If you cannot laugh at your own murder attempt, what can you laugh at?" I replied. When the wine arrived, the liquid poured into the crystal glasses, dark and rich like liquid rubies. It swirled in the light, innocent and pure. I picked up my glass. My hand was steady as a rock. I looked at the 2 men sitting with me. Harper, who had used the law to shield me. Dante, who had used his strength to save me. I did not have a speech prepared. I did not need one. "Gentlemen," I said, raising the glass, "they say you cannot choose your family. But I think they are wrong. I think family is exactly what you choose. You choose the people who stand in the fire with you. You choose the people who catch you when you fall." Dante and Harper raised their glasses. "To loyalty," Harper said softly. "To the new chapter," Dante added. We clinked the glasses together, the crystal singing a clear, perfect note that resonated in the quiet room. I took a sip. The wine was bold and complex, with notes of oak and berry. It tasted like life. It tasted like victory. I looked around the restaurant. The ghosts were gone. The shadow of Bradley and Kendra had vanished. I was 72 years old, but as I sat there surrounded by my true brothers, I felt like my life was just beginning. The waiter brought the appetizers, and for the first time in a month, I was hungry. Really hungry. I picked up my fork, ready to feast on the future. The early morning mist clung to the surface of the lake like a soft white blanket, shielding us from the rest of the world. I sat on the end of the weathered wooden dock, my legs dangling over the edge. Next to me sat a 5-year-old boy named Leo, wearing a life jacket that was slightly too big for him, and holding a fishing rod with the seriousness of a knight holding a sword. "Keep the tip up, Leo," I whispered softly. "You have to feel the line. You have to wait for the tug. It is a conversation between you and the fish. You cannot rush it." Leo nodded, his eyes wide with focus. He was Dante's son. He had his father's dark eyes and his father's quiet determination, but he had a joy in him that I had never seen in the boardrooms of New York. He didn't carry the weight of expectation. He just carried a worm on a hook. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a warehouse, bleeding and plotting revenge against my own flesh and blood. I was a man who thought legacy meant money. I thought it meant having your name on a building. I thought it meant passing down shares of stock to an ungrateful heir. I looked at the boy beside me. He didn't care about my bank account. He didn't know I used to run the city's logistics. To him, I was just Uncle Garrison, the man who knew how to tie knots and tell stories about the jungle. A sudden jerk on the line nearly pulled the rod from Leo's small hands. "I got one," he squealed, his voice echoing across the quiet water, shattering the morning silence. "I got one, Garrison, help me." "Steady," I said, putting my hand over his, guiding his movements. My hand looked ancient next to his weathered and scarred but strong. "Reel it in slow, don't fight him. Work with him." We worked together, the old soldier and the young boy battling a 4-pound bass. When we finally pulled the fish onto the dock, splashing and shimmering in the sunlight, Leo looked at me with a smile that could power a city. He threw his arms around my neck, burying his face in my flannel shirt. "We did it," he shouted. "We caught the monster." I froze for a second. The hug was spontaneous. It was uncalculated. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a prelude to asking for a loan. It was just love. Pure and simple. I wrapped my arms around the small frame and held him tight, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that I hadn't felt in 30 years. I looked up toward the cabin on the shore. Dante was standing on the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee, watching us. He raised his mug in a silent salute. He had given me a share in his company, but he had given me something much more valuable. He had shared his life. He had let me into the circle. I realized then that I had spent 70 years climbing the wrong mountain. I had chased power and bred vipers. I had tried to buy loyalty and ended up with treason. But here, on this quiet dock, with a fish flopping at my feet and a child laughing in my ear, I had finally found it. The thing I had been looking for my entire life. I released the fish back into the water, watching it swim away into the deep green. "Did you see him go?" Leo asked. "I saw him," I said, ruffling the boy's hair. "He is free. And so are we. Come on, Leo. Let's go get some breakfast. Your dad is making pancakes." I picked up the tackle box and walked back toward the house. I left the tycoon back in the city. I left the victim in the past. I walked into the warmth of a real home, not as a CEO, but simply as a happy man. I used to think the measure of a man was written in a ledger in black ink and bottom lines. I thought it was about the steel and the glass, and the number of zeros sitting in an offshore account. I spent 40 years building a fortress of solitude, thinking I was building a kingdom. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by people who nodded when I spoke and smiled when I looked at them. But I never saw their eyes. I never saw the hunger hiding behind the polite masks. They were waiting. They were always waiting for the lion to stumble so they could pick the bones clean. It took a glass of poisoned orange juice to open my eyes. It took the cold floor of a restaurant and the betrayal of the boy I raised to show me the truth. I looked death in the face, and death looked back and told me I was poor. I was the poorest rich man in New York because I had no one who would truly mourn me. They only wanted the inheritance. They wanted the golden egg, but they were willing to kill the goose to get it. I gave them exactly what they wanted. I gave them the illusion of victory. I let them walk into the trap thinking they were kings of the world. There is a dark satisfaction in watching greed eat itself. It is a cruel lesson, but a necessary one. You cannot teach a parasite to be a partner. You have to cut it out. I stripped them of their dignity. I stripped them of their freedom. And in doing so, I stripped myself of the heavy burden of a false family. I walked through the fire of their treachery, and I burned away everything that was fake. Now I sit here and look at the water. I look at Dante teaching his son to tie a knot on the dock. I look at the simple, quiet life that costs a fraction of my old existence but is worth infinitely more. I found loyalty in a security guard when I couldn't find it in my own son. I found family in a handshake when I couldn't find it in 30 years of paternity. I found peace in the truth, no matter how painful it was to accept. I realized that blood is not a binding contract. Love is action. Love is showing up when the bullets start flying. Love is not pouring poison, it is pouring wine for a friend who saved your life. The city is far away now. The sirens and the shouting and the ticker tape parade of vanity are just echoes in the distance. I am no longer the titan of industry. I am no longer the target. I am just a man fishing on a dock, breathing air that tastes like freedom. Sometimes you have to burn down the house to see the stars. Sometimes you have to lose everything you think is important to realize what is truly valuable has been standing right beside you all along, waiting for you to notice. They thought they could break me. They thought they could erase me. But they forgot that old soldiers do not fade away, we just change our tactics. I am Garrison Ford, and this is how I taught the vultures a lesson. The most profound lesson from Garrison Ford's journey is that family is defined by action, not DNA. We often assume that those who share our blood will protect us, but greed can turn even the closest kin into strangers. True wealth is not the balance in your bank account, but the loyalty of the people who stand by you when you have nothing left to offer them. Trust must be earned through deeds not demanded by birthright. In a world full of vultures looking for a meal value, the few who offer you a hand without asking for a price. If this story of betrayal and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales, and tell us in the comments, would you have forgiven Bradley, or did he get exactly what he deserved?